Good morning, Crossroads students. Hope you guys are all doing super well. This morning, I have a question for you. Have you ever lost your focus? Have you ever lost your focus? I think sometimes it's very easy to lose our focus, but one time I was playing baseball and I wasn't good at it. It was actually at my old church. They had a school there that ran a baseball camp, and I was at the church, and I was at the camp. My dad signed me up for it, and I was standing there. I think I was talking to someone else in the outfield because I was in the left part of the outfield, whatever you call it, stage left, if you're a theater. And I was there because no one ever hit there. There were hardly any left-handed hitters. And so when there were a left-handed hitter, they'd send me into the woods, and then everyone else would just move over to my spot because I wasn't very good. And this particular time, I'm standing there, and I think I was talking to the other guy in the outfield, and all of a sudden, they're hitting, and there was nothing coming to me, so I'm just kind of like, yeah, whatever. And all of a sudden, I hear people shouting, and I look, and the ball had rolled right next to me, and the guys in the infield were like, "Get the ball!" And I was like, "Sorry," and I took it, I threw it in, and it wasn't good. I think we lost a run. But I lost my focus. And if you can relate, maybe not to that situation, I'm sure you can relate to another situation. Maybe it's music, and you're playing a song in front of people, and then you start thinking about something else, and you start thinking about everyone watching you, or you start thinking about what you're going to eat afterwards, after your recital, and you start thinking about something else, and so you lose your focus, and you lose your spot, and you mess up a little bit. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's some other sport or activity that you do, but it's easy for us to lose our focus. And a lot of times the consequences are not that bad, right? Guys made fun of me, and it was what it was. We lost a run, and guess what? I don't remember the score of that game or any of the games I played back when I was 10. It didn't matter. And a lot of times consequences for losing your focus are minimal. Other times, like if you're driving or if you're, in a war, they're pretty high, right? The consequences. But a lot of times in our daily lives, they're pretty minimal. And I want to talk about a passage in the Old Testament where someone lost his focus, and that someone is a guy named Solomon. In the Bible, David, Solomon's dad, we have King David, and King David was in the city of Jerusalem, and he said, "You know what? I have this nice big palace." He's like, "But God still lives in a tent," which of course wasn't true, but God's presence did reside in that tent sometimes. And so he said, God still lives in a tent, what we call the tabernacle. And he said, "So God, I want to build a temple." And so God's like, "Okay, fine, you can build the temple." And he gave him some parameters and dimensions and stuff like that. That's really boring to read. But he said, "You can build the temple, that's fine." And later on, David had killed so many people that God said, "You know what, David, there's too much blood on your hands to build this temple." And so he got all the stuff ready, but he couldn't build it. So his son, later on Solomon, built the temple. And it finally came time for the temple to be done. And they built the Holy of Holies, which was this place where God's presence would be. Because back then, they didn't have the Holy Spirit. They had God's presence upon the earth, which was in this temple. And God told Solomon, he said, "Solomon, listen." He's like, "As long as you serve me and as long as you follow me, I will be in your temple and I will be your God." He says, "But if you turn away from me," he says, "I will leave this place." And he says, "I'm gone." And that's very reasonable, right? Very reasonable. God is a jealous God. And so Solomon said, "Okay, sounds good." Over the course of years, however, Solomon began marrying a lot of women. And he did this purely for ceremonial reasons, or mostly for ceremonial reasons. He would marry these women, and what would happen is, back then, is when you marry the daughter of another king, you create an alliance with that kingdom. And it makes your kingdom wealthier, and it promotes peace. And Solomon married 700 different wives. And a lot of these women were the daughters of different kings and different leaders. And so he united a lot of the area, but in doing so, he created a very big problem. Because all of these women, not all of these women believed in the God that we believe in. They believed in idols, and they believed in all this other kind of stuff. And so as a result, Solomon built 700 different temples for 700 different women for their gods. And that was a huge problem because in the end, Solomon began worshiping in these other temples with his other wives. And God's promise held true. God said, as long as you serve me, as long as you worship me, I'm going to be here. But if you start worshiping idols and other gods, he says, I'm gone. And that's what happened. Eventually, God moved out of the temple. But why I think that story is important for us is because I think a lot of times in our lives, it is very easy for us to lose our focus when it comes to God. I think after camp or maybe after a retreat or maybe after North Bay, it is very easy for us to be on fire because we're around other Christians. We're kind of in this bubble of safety when it comes to being away from technology and being away from your Netflix or your TikTok or your Snapchat or things that just get in your face and distract you from who you are. So when you're in that situation, man, it's really easy to be on fire and make all these sorts of decisions. But not long after you leave that environment, you start losing your focus. And I know this is true because it's true of me. I start losing my focus. And I start thinking about other things. I start watching too much Netflix. I start waking up to Netflix and going to sleep to Disney Plus. And I start focusing on all these other things. And in my downtime, as I'm making dinner, I'll be scrolling through TikTok and I'll be looking at Instagram and watching what everyone else is doing in their lives. And eventually, I have no time in my life and in my thoughts for God. And I do the same thing that Solomon did. And I start loving and worshiping other things. And maybe you don't even realize you're doing it. I can promise you that I do not believe that any of you are putting your phone up on a pedestal and bowing down to it and worshiping. That's not what I'm talking about at all. But I'm talking about giving time to things that give no life back to you. And I have no problem with Netflix. I think there's a lot of good shows. There's a lot of bad shows on there. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to lie to you. But there's a lot of good shows on there. I don't have a problem with Disney Plus or Hulu or any of these streaming services. I don't have a problem with gaming systems and playing games online with friends and having community there. I don't have a problem even necessarily with TikTok. There's a lot of funny stuff on there. There's a lot of interesting stuff. And there's a lot of trash on TikTok as well. And you have to be careful. What I do have a problem with is when those things take place of God in my life. When I start talking with my friends more about the Netflix shows that I'm watching than about the Bible verses that I'm reading. When my reaction to being cut off in traffic is a reaction that I see on some Netflix show more than a reaction of love and forgiveness that I really should have, that's when I know I'm giving Netflix and I'm giving media and I'm giving Hollywood the place of God in my life. And so here's my challenge to you. My challenge is this. We're still pretty early on in this year. And I want to challenge you to evaluate your life and say, am I giving more time to these things that don't matter? Am I giving more time to these things that just lead to dead places and that lead to bad habits and that lead to bad thoughts and that lead to bad situations and that lead to bad ideas? Am I giving more of my time and my energy to these things than I'm giving to the God who loves me, to the God who sent his son for me, to the God who tells me how to live, to the God who gives me life? Because if the answer is yes, then something has to change. And that change is not always fun. That change could mean deleting Netflix. That change could mean playing less of Xbox Live. That change could mean deleting not just your TikTok, but your TikTok account, right? And having someone that keeps you accountable. That change is not always comfortable, but I promise you, that change you make right now in your life will change the course of your life. And so that's my challenge to you, is just evaluate yourself, and maybe you're doing great, and maybe this is for someone else. But if that is you, my challenge to you is to talk to someone about it. Because it can be very easy to make a decision up here and never make it actually happen out here. And so my challenge to you is to find someone, maybe a friend or just someone you know in church that'll just ask you and keep you accountable and say, hey, let me see your screen time, and I'll show you my screen time and prove that, I'm not on it. And it's not about the actions of feeling better and about earning our place with God, but it's about It's about knowing more about who He is and how He wants us to live. That's what's important. So that's my challenge to you. I hope it was encouraging. If you have any more questions or thoughts, I would really love for you to reach out to me or anyone here at Crossroads, because that's why we're here, and we're going to do this with you. So with that being said, I will leave you. Hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and I will see you soon.